Yeah. Again, Scott, how's it going? You know what's going on? I have to tell you this first. They changed the time without me knowing it. My dashboard is telling me it's 11 minutes to go, and so I get on my other screen and it's telling me 74 minutes to go, and I'm like 74 minutes, and I go to the main thing and it switched it to an hour later, and then my as the intro was going on, my dashboard was freezing, and my microphone was messed up. So
it's called life. It's called life.
So
it happens, man.
Oh man,
it's all okay.
Wow. Yeah. How's it going? And I won't ask you to reintroduce yourself to the people because if they don't know you by now, they're just somewhere in the bushes. But how's it going with you? And after you answer that, what is going on with Ukraine now?
Well, I'm doing great. Things are going well. I'm actually leaving tomorrow for a trip to Russia, where I'll my book has been published there, and I'm going to use this as an opportunity to go and do a book tour that's not just about promoting the book, but promoting better relations between the United States and Russia. So hopefully, it will be a good trip from that perspective. So I'm quite excited. I haven't been there since 1991, so I think things have changed quite a bit. So it's going to be interesting.
We hope that you're going to be blessed and safe, though.
Well, I hope that every trip I take. There's always risks when you start journeys of significance. They're significant because they're difficult. If they weren't difficult, everybody'd be doing them, and it wouldn't be a big deal. But so it'll be good. But I have a positive outlook and a positive energy, and so I'm very optimistic. It's being done in the context of a couple of things. One, disarmament. You said to briefly introduce myself, but I spent a lot of my life involved in disarmament. I was a Marine Corps officer. I actually, when I was first in the Soviet Union or Russia back in 1988, it was to implement an arms control treaty, the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, the first ever arms elimination treaty. We got rid of two categories of nuclear weapons, intermediate range missiles, short range missiles. It's the first time that had ever been done. And that's what I wrote my book about, the disarmament at the time of perestroika. That's the book that was published in Russia. And so it'd be very good to go over there and talk about this, because that was a time of, in the 1980s, we almost were in nuclear war. It's actually worse than the situation we face today. A lot of people go, well, how could that be? Trust me, it was. And yet we use the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty as a vehicle to bring our two nations together in common purpose, not to fight one another, but to work on how to prevent wars, how to eliminate the threat of nuclear weapons. And for a brief shining moment, it worked. And I'd like to see if we could recapture that spirit. So that's why I'm excited to go over to Russia and talk about this book and see what their feelings are, then bring that message back here to the United States, see if I can help rekindle the concept of, rather than being enemies of Russia, why can't we be friends with Russia? I also spent a lot of time in the Middle East. I fought in the Gulf War, and my main job there was hunting down Scud missiles before they could be fired against Israel or Saudi Arabia. And then when the war ended, I spent 7 years as a UN weapons inspector in Iraq, overseeing the disarmament of their programs. I resigned because in opposition to U.S. policy that wasn't about disarmament, but about getting rid of Saddam Hussein. And I've been speaking out ever since, trying to inject some fact-based truth into a debate that is otherwise colored by misrepresentation, outright lies, distortions, and everything else that comes from just not telling the truth. And that's where we are today. That's where I'm at. You asked about Ukraine. Just briefly speaking, Russia's winning, Ukraine's losing. It's a horrible human cost. There's nothing that Ukraine or NATO can do to change this outcome. The question now is, how do we want it to end? Will we accept the fact that Russia has beaten us? and seek to work with Russia to come up with a way to terminate this tension? Or are we going to be upset that a war that we started didn't finish the way we wanted and continue to escalate, leading back to the potential of nuclear war, which brings me back to my book and why it's so important to be doing this tour in Russia right now. Because if the average American doesn't know it, you're literally 1 millisecond away from dying. Right now, as we speak, we may not finish this podcast. We probably will. But I'm just saying that there's a potential at any moment right now for either the United States or Russia to miscalculate, to make a mistake. And that mistake could manifest itself in the use of a nuclear weapon. And once that happens, the world ends about 40 minutes later. So that's why this tour is important. That's why the message of peace is important. And that's why I'm going to undertake a journey that many people are telling me, don't do it. But if I don't do it, who will? And if nobody does it, how are we going to solve this problem? So here we are.
So why do you think that there's no adults in Washington and they continue to escalate when it's already been acknowledged that Russia has escalatory dominance on the European continent? I mean, are they crazy?
Well, I mean, crazy, no, that would be disrespectful. I think many of them are quite intelligent. The problem is they are married to a vision of America that's 20 to 30 years out of date. We are not the sole remaining superpower on the face of the earth. We are not the global hegemon. We don't get to call the shots. We're not Tony Soprano anymore. There's other families out there that are saying they want to be heard. And, these families are China, these families are Russia, these families are Africa as a continent, South America as a continent, Asia, India. They're tired of waiting for the United States to take the lead and dictate an outcome. They've decided that they're fed up with America as being a bully, and that they're just going to step up and grow up. I mean, this is what we have here is, a situation where at one time the world was the equivalent of a bunch of children being led by the American adult. And not a very good parent, by the way, a bad parent, a parent that was selfish, not caring about the children, only caring about the parent. Now the kids have grown up and they're taking a look at the parents saying, we don't want to be like that. We don't want to live under this wing. We want to, move on, grow up, be adults, do our own thing. And the parent can't handle it. So the parent's screaming and shouting and all that. But the parent gets older, arthritic, can't move as fast, can't think as fast. And the kids are outrunning them, kids are outgrowing them. And that's America today. We're an older, arthritic-ridden, senile nation. And the rest of the world's growing up. And they just don't want to be under our wings anymore.
In the Donbass, where is it standing right now between Russia, Ukraine, and NATO?
Well, there's an old saying that amateurs talk about tactics, professionals talk about logistics. And you're going to see a whole bunch of people out there talking about, man, if the Ukrainians can just get some tanks up there and they can get some airplanes and they can do this and they can do that and they can do this, and the Russians can't do this, that, and the other thing. A, they're just dead wrong, but B, they're talking the wrong fight. You see, Russia's not playing that game. Russia's playing the game of logistical dominance, which means sustainable dominance. Russia can sustain this fight better than Ukraine can. Ukraine is running out of resources. And when you run out of certain resources, it becomes a very bad day for you. Russia has spent the entire winter and early months, weeks of the spring, destroying Ukraine's ability to sustain this fight. They've been taking out Ukrainian air defense. They've been blowing up logistics. They've been ensuring that Ukraine can't reconstitute its artillery stockpiles. And what this means is Ukraine can't fight, can't continue the fight. Meanwhile, Russia's relatively untouched. Yeah, they're suffering casualties on the front line, but in terms of their air force, it's there. Where's the Ukrainian Air Force? In terms of their artillery, it's there. Where's the Ukrainian artillery? In terms of air defense, it's really there. There's no more Ukrainian air defense. And so Russia has achieved total dominance of the battlefield, where they are literally inflicting their will, imposing their will on the battlefield at a horrific cost to the Ukrainians. Hundreds of Ukrainian soldiers are dying every day. On some days, that number goes up into the thousands. The kill ratio right now is 10, 14 to 1 in favor of Russia. That is, for every one Russian that's killed by the Ukrainians, 10 or 14 Ukrainians die. And that's just unsustainable. So this war is headed towards a conclusion that is favorable to Russia. The only question now is, how benevolent will Russia be? Will Russia take this to the bitter end and destroy Ukraine and make Europe feel threatened? You talked about Russia having escalatory dominance, but dominance doesn't mean that you have to dominate.
Right.
Escalatory dominance means that you can actually veer the direction of the conflict towards an off-ramp that leads towards future stability, good relations, or at least the potential to improve relations between Russia and Europe, Russia and the United States. And this is why we saw China get involved. Believe me, China would not have made the phone call to Zelensky if Russia didn't want them to make that phone call. Russia wanted them to make that phone call because Russia continues to believe in a diplomatic solution to this problem. They tried to get a diplomatic solution before the war. They were shut down. The way they originated this conflict was to achieve a rapid diplomatic solution. Almost got that, but NATO stepped in and said no. And so everybody's saying, well, that means Russia's now going to go to no, their goal is still a diplomatic solution. And so they welcome the Chinese intervention. But China knows that whatever a diplomatic solution can't be handing victory to Ukraine and defeat to Russia. Russia has won this war. There's nothing going to change that. So whatever the diplomatic solution is must reflect the reality of the situation as it currently exists, with Russia owning Crimea, owning 4 territories, Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, and Lugansk, and insisting on the demilitarization and denazification of Ukraine. That's what Russia wants. Now, the question is, how are they going to get it? By destroying Ukraine, or by getting Ukraine to recognize that that's the inevitable outcome? What's the best deal we can get in the meantime? So the sooner Ukraine ends this war, the more they're going to have when we get into the post-conflict period. The longer this war goes on, of course, it's the same thing with NATO. NATO's burned up, tens of billions of dollars worth of equipment that they can't replace. Their defense industry isn't geared up for this. Russia, meanwhile, has its defense industry running on all cylinders. So NATO's at a total disadvantage here. And the last thing NATO needs is to get involved in, a contest of, resource accumulation, because Russia's defense industry is already in full drive, which means if you want to continue this, Russia's going to outpace you in terms of production of defense stuff. What you would really want in the West is to break this thing down and then encourage Russia to slow down its defense industry accumulations. There's a sense of normalcy. Because another thing that happens is when you start producing weapons, there's a temptation to use them. It's just the reality of it. It's like, Kevin Costner, The Field of Dreams. He didn't go out and build that baseball field just because he wanted to look at it. He built a baseball field because he wanted to play baseball. So you don't go building all these advanced weapons, spending all this money, and then go, oh, we're just going to look at them. No. You got them. Temptation is to use them. And we need to take that temptation away. We need not to give Russia an excuse to use these weapons. So again, I think Chinese diplomacy could be our salvation.
Well, do you think Russia will stop their military operation before seizing Odessa? Because if they stop before seizing Odessa, that will give NATO a chance to reconstitute later and use Odessa as a jump-off point again. And without Odessa, Ukraine loses a lot of utility for them.
Well, first of all, I think the West needs to understand that Ukraine will be of no utility to them when this is done. Whatever the diplomatic solution is, Ukraine will never be allowed to join NATO, will probably not be allowed to join the European Union for some time, and will be, you know, be somewhat constrained in its sovereign choices, but at least be alive. It'll have Odessa. And by possessing Odessa, you have an outlet to the sea for your grain, for your oil, for your industry. It allows you to survive as a modern nation state. So the sooner they can bring this conflict to an end, the more likely they'll retain Odessa. This is why this intervention by China is so important at this time, because Vladimir Putin continues to articulate the objectives of the special military operation only in terms of improving the social and economic well-being of the territories that were absorbed in September. He's made no mention of taking new territories. So that's hope. But if Ukraine says, no, we're not going to accept peace, we're going to reject Chinese diplomacy, and this war continues, now Odessa becomes a military objective that must be taken. And once Russia takes it, they're not giving it back. I think the Ukrainians should understand that. You know, the best thing you can do right now is stop the war and hold on to what you got. Because if you continue this war, understanding that you have no air defense, your forces are getting decimated, you have no reserves, you're not going to launch a major counterattack, all that's going to happen is you're going to lose more territory, in addition to losing more men. And once you lose Odessa, you're never getting it back. Once you lose Kharkov, you're never getting it back. Dnipropetrovsk, you're never getting it back. And I hope that the Chinese are making this point, that however bad Ukraine thinks the situation is now, it is not going to get better ever. The best you can hope for is what you have. And if you continue pursuing conflict in the misguided belief that somehow you can reverse the trend and reconquer territories, you'll just end up losing more, 20% more of your country gone like that. So I'm hopeful that the Chinese are able to articulate this to Zelensky. I think the Ukrainians are also beginning to realize that the West is just tired. We're tired. We don't have the resources. We're fed up. We're fed up with a lot of things. But most important, we're just fed up with the fact that we've lost this. We're tired. And I think there's a growing recognition that we can't win it. So as we always do, when the going gets tough, we cut and run. And I think that Ukraine is looking over there saying, yeah, they're going to leave us like they did Afghanistan. They're going to leave us like they did South Vietnam. Maybe we shouldn't fight to the bitter end. Maybe we should go ahead and recognize the inevitability of the outcome, try and get the best deal we can get right now. And the Chinese are in a position to try and get that for them.
This is a two-part question. What is the scene like in Arkiamis or Bakhmut? And if America and the West realizes that they can't win in Ukraine, why are they pivoting towards China, whose industrial output dwarfs what Russia is doing?
Well, the situation in Bakhmut or Artyomsk is dire for Ukraine. The Russians are in the business of killing Ukrainians, and business is very good. About a month ago, Russia had said they've killed about 32,000 Ukrainian soldiers just in that battle alone. And I can tell you that number's probably gone up by over 10, maybe 15,000 since that time. So we're looking at, close to 50,000 Ukrainian dead just in the Battle of Bakhmut. And it's just going to get worse. The Russians aren't in the bit. Everybody's like, why haven't Russia take the town? Well, why does Russia want to lose more men? If you have a situation right now where, you can go advance slowly in the process, destroy the Ukrainian military. In Bakhmut, the Bakhmut battle has broken the back of the Ukrainian military, just broken the back of it. It will never recover from this. This will go down as the decisive battle of this war. This is where Ukraine, put their bayonet in the ground and said, we're going to fight here. And they did. They poured everything they had in this fight, and they lost. They're losing. And Ukraine will never recover from this loss. That's just a straight up. Now, in the United States, understand that a lot of our policymakers, as I said earlier, are trapped in old thinking, what I call the immediate honeymoon of the post-Cold War years where the Soviet Union went away. China had not yet risen. The United States was the sole remaining superpower. And a lot of these people came into their adult configuration, so to speak, during this time. So they've been programmed into thinking about America being something that America no longer is. And so when they take a look at a changing world, the only solution they have is old school thinking, muscle flexing, economic sanctions, military maneuvers, diplomatic tough rhetoric, and all that. Well, the world's fed up with it. Our muscles have atrophied. We spent 20 years in Afghanistan and Iraq forgetting how to fight long, big, large-scale conflict. We don't have that muscle group anymore. I don't care if you bench pressed 300 pounds 30 years ago. If you haven't been to the gym for the last 20 years, you ain't getting anywhere close to 300 pounds up today. And America's that old football player that has the 300-pound, bench press T-shirt that you earned when you were 20 years old. Then all you've been doing is drinking beer since then, so it's sort of stretched and it's got some stains on it from the wings that you've been eating, but you're still wearing that shirt as if you can still do it. And now, if you go into the gym, though, you'll be lucky to get 135 up. You get the bar, maybe 2 45-pound plates, and you'll do this, and then you'll bring it down, and then you'll look around, make sure nobody saw, then you walk out with your 300-pound shirt. That's the reality. That's where America is today. We can't lift anymore. We can't do it anymore, but we walk around like we can. And the world's tired of watching this. And there was a time when they'd go, well, he used to be able to bench 300 pounds, so we're going to treat him with respect. And now they're just fed up with it. You can't bench it anymore. Leave the bench press. We have bigger dogs want to come in and lift weights now. Okay, we're tired of you sitting there texting on your phone, eating a wing while you hog the bench. Let's get other people in there to lift. And China's ready to lift, Russia's ready to lift, India's ready to lift, everybody's ready to lift. America's just not the weightlifter we used to be. And it's hard for us to accept. We have a whole bunch of diplomats right now that are of a certain age, that people who grew up when America could flex, could lift. But their entire way of thinking about the world is shaped by that. And so they're not able to come up with new thinking because they're politically trapped. That's half the problem, is all this thinking is tied to domestic politics. Most of what's going wrong in the world today is because our officials can't be honest to the American people, because they've sold a certain image to the American people about what America is and what America can be, and they can't now stand up and say. There's an old saying that I got told by my general when I was a young lieutenant, and I'd be standing in front of him knowing that I was right and trying to explain to him how right I was. And he'd say, Lieutenant, when you're standing in front of the general and you're explaining, you're losing. You don't want to be explaining to the general, no matter what. Doesn't matter if you're right. The fact that you have to explain it to the general means you're wrong because you did something wrong that needs explaining. Politicians have been misleading the American public for so long, and they've been working in cahoots with the media, mainstream media. So the American public has come to accept certain things as a given, such as America will never lose a fight. America is the strongest economy. The dollar will forever be the strongest currency in the world today. Why? Because we've been told this by our politicians, and it's been echoed by the mainstream media. Well, that's everything I just said is a lie. It's all a lie. But now, can a politician now go, hey, for the last 30 years, I've been lying to you, and the mainstream media has been promulgating that lie. But now I want to come clean, tell you the truth, and hope you vote for me again next election. And they'll say, no, thank you for telling the truth, but get out of here. We're going to bring in somebody more honest. No politician's willing to explain. So, because when you're explaining, you're losing. So now they're going to come up and they're going to continue the same lie. And that's what's happening. But now, to continue the same lie, you have to continue the same flex. And so we're out in the world flexing. There's a great line from the original Top Gun movie, where the senior aviation guy is talking to Tom Cruise's character. He says, son, your mouth's writing checks your body can't cash. And that's what's happening right now. We're out in the world, mouth, but the body can't cash that check anymore. And the world's starting to call in the loan. And wait till the loan sharks show up, because the interest rate is going to be pretty high.
We have a few questions in the chat, and I'm going to, let's see. So if you see me look away when you're talking, I'm actually looking at you, but I'm looking at you through a different camera.
No problem. You're working, man. I'm going to watch you work. I admire it.
Thank you so much. No Way Out says, in my opinion, the Russian forces will take Odessa. Kyiv had enough chances to negotiate and keep Odessa, but that's past. Do you think so?
Look, if things continue the way they are, I agree 100%. But I will also say that Russia's always been looking for a diplomatic solution. Russia has always wanted to limit this conflict. So I believe if the Chinese were able to put something on the table that gave Russia what it wanted strategically, then I personally believe that Putin could stop the war now, short of Odessa. But if the Ukrainians aren't willing to work with the Chinese, Russia's just not going to. We're facing a situation where the Ukrainians are going to collapse sometime this summer, and when that collapse happens, Russia will be able to move in, take Odessa, take Kharkov, take Dnipropetrovsk, and as I said, once they take them, they're never giving them back. I personally believe that's the most likely outcome, just because I don't see either NATO or Zelensky having common sense. But the Chinese have proven us all wrong in terms of what Chinese diplomacy is capable of. They certainly took the world by storm by getting the Iranians and the Saudis together to make peace. And they're doing a really good job of working with the Russians to get the Saudis and the Syrians to make peace. So I'm not going to be dismissive in terms of the potential or the possibility of a Chinese diplomatic success here. They're engaged. They're big boys. They know how to play. They're serious people. And I think, we have to treat them seriously. And I think the Russians are. Again, I think, remember, the Chinese didn't do this in a vacuum. There was a 3-day meeting between President Putin and President Xi Jinping in Moscow just a little while ago where all of this was discussed. So I don't think the Chinese are engaging in diplomacy with Ukraine if the Russians were just saying, we ain't doing it. No, because no superpower, no big nation wants to be set up for failure. This is a big risk that China's taking. They're putting their prestige on the line. And they would only do that if there was a perception of success. Remember how long it took this phone call to occur. Everybody was expecting it to happen immediately. It didn't. Why? Because the Chinese are out there putting the feelers out. And they're basically, letting the Ukrainians know, if this call happens, we're serious about this. Meaning that we're not just going to have a call so you can get a made-for-TV moment to say you spoke to the Chinese leader. If this call happens, that means you have to sit down at the table, you have to walk onto the field, you got to play the game. And the game is called diplomacy. Now, there's no guaranteed outcome, just like any game. It can go any way, and diplomacy is a tough thing. But I don't think the Chinese would have done this if they felt that there was no chance of success. I think the Chinese believe there's a chance of success, but they're going to do it in a way that safeguards their reputation, meaning that a big burden is going to be put on the Ukrainians. And Ukraine's going to have to deliver. And that's where I think this thing fails, because I don't think Zelensky is the leader capable of standing up to NATO, standing up to the United States, and doing what's needed to prevent Russian troops from entering Odessa.
We have a long. I'm trying to keep track of the time because you and I already discussed the time constraints. Excuse me, but if I don't get to your questions, please don't think hard of me. Charge it to my head and not to my heart. We're in this time constraint for Scott because he has a lot of things he has to do before he leaves for Russia tomorrow. So forgive me. Now I'll try to ask 2 more questions, and then I'll ask me a question, and then if it's another question in the chat, I'll go back to it. Justin Slaffel, I'm sorry if I'm butchering your YouTube name. It says, will you ask Scott if he knows anything about the Black socialists who are in prison for saying exactly what you are saying, Scott, about this war?
I mean, I think it's the again, you want to talk about butchering things. I'm the king of butchering things. But I think it's the Uhuru movement or something of that nature. I've actually met them. They were in Washington, or at least one of their representatives was Washington D.C. Meeting with Caleb Maupin and CPI. And their hearts are in the absolute right place. I think you and I have talked about this before. I mean, just look at me, okay? Skin color, everything. I'm not a black socialist. That doesn't mean, and so I don't pretend to understand roots of their movement, all of the angst, justifiable angst they have that they bring to the table, etc. What I do is respect the fact that that's real for them and that they are really looking for a solution to the problems that are manifest. And one of the things that they that they I believe in is that we shouldn't be seeking conflict, and that it's good to sit down with the Russians and find a path forward for a peaceful outcome. The United States government just doesn't want this to happen, and I think what happens sometimes is that we have well-meaning people, for instance, in the Black Socialist movement, who engage with the Russians in a way that can be exploited by the FBI. It doesn't mean there's bad intent on their part. It just means that maybe they were naive into thinking that if they did X, that the U.S. government would never manipulate that to make it look like Y. Because that's what's happened here. I don't believe that any crime has been committed. I don't believe these guys did anything wrong. I believe they're doing what I'm trying to do, which is to improve relations, to create friendship. But the FBI has come down hard on them, and and here's the sad thing. I mean, again, I don't like playing the race card. I really don't like playing the race card because I would like to believe that our country could move past that. But if they were white, this wouldn't be happening. Straight up, they are part of a black movement that is seen by the powers that be to be radical. And so this is anti-radicalism. This is racist. This is basically straight up racism on the part of the U.S. government. And the sad thing is nobody's going to rally behind these guys. I mean, nobody's significant. They need, big time lawyers to come in. They need the ACLU to come in. But because Russia's involved, and that's the magic of what the U.S. government has done here, they've thrown Russia into the mix. And everybody goes, ooh, we can't touch that. Ooh, they must be bad because they were talking to the Russians. You and I have talked about this in the past. Russophobia is one of the greatest diseases infecting this country. And what we're seeing with the persecution and prosecution of the Black Socialist movement is how the U.S. government has weaponized Russophobia to take down people they find to be politically inconvenient.
The next question is from, and forgive me if I'm butchering your name, charge it to my head and not to my heart. What is Scott's opinion? Is random Zerg or something like that. It says, what is Scott's opinion on or idea that Ukraine could be liberated by Ukrainians who will join Russian forces? I don't.
No, I understand what you're saying. Basically, there is a, I don't know about joining Russian forces, but if you go back to World War I, the Russians were on the, we're fighting the Germans and the Austro-Hungarian Empire on what was their Western Front. And basically, they just got tired of the war. And eventually the troops just said, we're done fighting, we're pivoting around, and we're marching. And they marched straight towards St. Petersburg, and they took down the Tsar, took down the imperial dynasty, the Romanov dynasty. But they didn't do it to join the West. They did it to stop the war. And I think there's a real possibility that these reservists, these territorials, these men who are being conscripted at gunpoint, who don't want to go to the trenches and die, could leave the front and move towards Kiev with the goal of removing the Ukrainian Tsar, Zelensky. I don't think they do it to join Russia. I think they do it to try and bring it into the war. And if the Russians were smart, they take advantage of that and bring this war to a close. But that is a possibility. I won't say it's a probability because there's still a lot of fight left in the Ukrainians. Even though the Russians are able to drop bombs where they want to, there's a lot of nationalist units. The Stepan Bandera ideology is still gripped many, many people who are rallying around Zelensky. And so I think there would be more of a fight than maybe people would suspect in defense of Zelensky. I mean, there's a lot of people who continue to believe that Zelensky's on the right side of history, Russia's on the wrong side of history, a lot of Ukrainians, and they're willing to put their lives on the line in defense of that belief.
Now, Scott, here's something from me. With the Bakhmut or Arkiamas situation looking bleak in the surrounding areas, we heard that Zelensky is thinking about a confederation with Poland, which means that Poland would have, quote unquote, the right to come in and intervene to preserve what was looked at as historical Poland in the Lvov or Lviv area. How do you see that playing out? Do you think that will happen? And if it happens, what would Russia's response be? And then what would NATO's response be?
Well, they're talking about it, so you can't discount it. Straight up, you can't discount it. Let's talk about NATO for a second. NATO Article 5 alliances, the Article 5 part of the charter says an attack against one is an attack against all. But one of the things that NATO says about expanding is that they don't extend invitations to nations that have ongoing territorial disputes. Why? Because if you, for instance, Georgia has Abkhazia and South Ossetia that have been taken over by Russian-backed rebels, and there's Russian peacekeeping forces in each place, and each side has built up their own military. So if NATO says, Georgia, come on in, and now Georgia joins NATO and then seeks to take advantage of that by engaging in a fight with these breakaway republics, NATO is automatically at war. And so that's why NATO said you can't do this until you resolve. Now, a corollary to that is Poland can't. I'll give you an example. Turkey. Turkey's a NATO member, but Turkey moved into Syria, ended up fighting the Syrian army, and for a brief while fought the Russian army. Was that an attack against one? Is it attacking against all? Does NATO get involved? No, because NATO wasn't part of the decision to go into Syria. NATO would have opposed that. So Turkey was on their own there. So if Poland makes a decision to erase the border, so to speak, and move into Western Ukraine, that is not going to be a NATO action. That's a unilateral Polish action. And it means that if Russia responds against Polish troops in Ukraine, not Poland itself, but in Ukraine, there's nothing NATO can do about it. And I think Poland knows this. Therefore, they're not going to get involved in something they know they can't win. Russia will not allow, at this point in time, Poland to, on its own volition, move into Western Ukraine and take it over. Now, here's the interesting thing. Some senior Russian people have recently talked and said and insinuated that, yeah, maybe the best thing to do is give Western Ukraine to the Poles. So a eventual peace settlement, especially one that involves denazification of Ukraine, might include ripping out Western Ukraine and giving it to the Poles and making the Nazis their problem, as opposed to this. It's far-fetched, but who knows? But that's where I think we stand on that. Belarus has made it clear that it won't tolerate Polish troops coming into Ukraine. They'll view that as an existential threat, and they'll fight. Russia has created a military and economic union with Belarus, so Russia would become involved. There's a big joint group of forces operating on Belarusian soil that could come down, and they outman, outgun, outclass anything the Poles could put on the ground. So it would be very escalatory for Poland to do something like this with an outcome that in no way is guaranteed to be positive for Poland. So I don't think it's going to happen unless Russia wants it to happen.
Oh, okay. Well, excuse me. What is this going around saying that Joe Biden is contemplating sending U.S. pilots to give air cover to Ukrainian troops in this so-called upcoming offensive?
I mean,
and what's the ramification for that?
Pardon?
And what will be the ramifications of that if that took place?
Well, the ramifications would be that every airplane we sent in to support the Ukrainians would be shot down. You know, we Scott, how could that be? We're the best Air Force in the world. Really? What have we done for the last 20 years? When was the last time we went up against an integrated air defense system? For the last 20 years, we've been dropping bombs on wedding parties in Afghanistan, on innocent villagers and goat herders in Iraq. We haven't fought an enemy that's capable of fighting back from an air power perspective. We've learned a lot of bad habits. So the notion that we're suddenly going to take these pilots, our pilots have zero real world combat experience, zero. Scott, we're the most experienced pilots in the world. We're very good at flying 30,000 feet above a desert and dropping a bomb without anybody opposing us. We're pretty good at that. But now we got a hook and jab with an enemy that's got integrated air defense layered and fighters that are coordinated, and we've never done that. And so, huge learning curve. There's a famous book called America's First Battles, and basically it describes the first battles of each major war, which we always lose. Why? Because we're always fighting the last war, and we have to get our face pounded before we realize, oh, we're in a different kind of war. And then we adapt, we overcome, we adjust. But in this case, if we're going to put airplanes on, over the ground in Ukraine to support an offensive, it won't go well. It won't go well at all. And so what are the ramifications? Well, nuclear war is one. Where are these planes going to take off from if they're flown by U.S. pilots? Are they going to take off in Ukraine, or are they going to take off from NATO airfields? Because I can guarantee you, if they fly in and engage the Russians will take out the airfields where they came in from. That means that Russia's attacking NATO. Article 5 now kicks in. And now we've created a dangerous escalation ladder of which there's literally no way off. And it'll end in a nuclear war, which is why I don't believe that Joe Biden's actually thinking this. I think this is things put out there. I haven't heard anything official from the U.S. government that they're considering this. I think this is irresponsible speculation by a bunch of armchair generals who are trying to theorize, how could the United States help Ukraine win the war? And so they bought into the mythology of unsurpassed American, air power, and that this would do it. There's no such thing as unsurpassed American air power. The Russians easily have a counter anything we can bring into the table. What about the stealth, Scott? What about the S-500, guys? Designed to defend stealth. I mean, it just doesn't work that way. So I think this is just fantasy. I think Joe Biden knows that, and if he doesn't know, the people surrounding him know what the consequences would be, and therefore they would advise against this.
Now, going back to something you said earlier when we were discussing Poland, but what if Poland goes in and it's okay with Russia and they seize the so-called historical Polish lands? Wouldn't that set off a chain reaction where Germany would now be looking at Poland and saying, hey, we want our historical lands back too? And then you have a domino effect across Europe.
This is one of the and again, this is what, Russia, a lot of people forget that before Russia moved in February of last year, and before they annexed these territories, changing the map, Russia fought for the sovereignty of Ukraine because Russia knew that you don't want to get in the business of erasing lines and drawing new lines. That the whole purpose at the end of the Second World War was to solidify a map that would be unchanged, thereby and unchangeable, thereby removing the temptation on the part of some nations to invade their neighbor and correct the map. Russia did what it did after NATO intervened, and they had no choice but to annex these territories. But it's a slippery slope. And it's one thing, though, for NATO to say, well, shame on you, Russia. We will never recognize these map changes, like we did back in the Cold War when Russia went into Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania and took those territories over. If you take a look at a Cold War map of the Soviet Union, those territories are always colored differently because we don't recognize them. Lands. And so we could end up producing maps that for the next 100 years show Crimea and the other thing is occupied lands. That's politics. Stupid, but it's politics. But the West would just say that's Russia. Russia did that. What happens when Poland does it? What happens when Poland erases the line? Because, there's a part of Ukraine that used to belong to Hungary, Transcarpathia, a huge Hungarian population down there. What if Hungary says, we're going to erase that line too? And then there's Pennsylvania, that's part of Carpathia, belongs to Romania. What if they erase that line? Now you're in a land grab. And what's good for the goose is good for the gander. The Germans, as you said, may very well look and say, yeah, we want Silesia back. We'd like Prussia back. We'd like Pomerania back. Yeah, those historic German lands. Bring them on back. They may even look at France and go, Alsace-Lorraine's looking pretty good right now. And it just goes on and on and on. And where does it end? So it's very dangerous. And that's why I think there would be very little support in Europe for any Polish gambit to erase the line with Romania or with Ukraine.
Well, and I know we only have about 15 minutes left, but I want to stay on Poland just one more time. Why is Poland pushing so hard for this to annex those lands, and why are they so hell-bent on helping to deindustrialize Germany? Do they believe that they will ascend to the number one spot in Europe?
Well, I think the Poles definitely want to become the new West Germany. What I mean by that is back in the Cold War, West Germany was, the largest place where American troops were based, and that it created, what was seen to be not only an extremely close friendship, but it gave West Germany a sense of invulnerability. As long as I have 300,000 American troops here, no one's going to touch me. And Poland now is saying, hey, look, we have historical problems with Russia. We would like the American bases to be in Poland. We don't like them to be in Germany. We want them to be in Poland. And so Poland's all about making Poland the center of gravity now for Europe. The new, main player, the big boy on the block is going to be Poland. What they don't realize is that nobody else shares this vision. Nobody, because most people don't like Poland. They're not people tend to forget that prior to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the European Union was getting ready to sanction Poland because it was operating their court systems in a manner which deviated from European Union norms and standards. They were attacking the civil rights record of Poland. So the Poles tend to forget that, but I think that's the problem. It's just Polish arrogance, it's Polish ignorance, it's Polish hubris that's all combining to create this notion of how Poland can be the new West Germany of Europe, but it isn't going to happen.
Okay, so now let's transition with the last few minutes that we have to the Asian front. Why is America, as she's losing in Europe? That's the thing. Let me know it's 10 minutes. Why is she losing in Europe, and yet she is stoking tensions with her economic equal and her number one financer and her number one investor? Isn't that lunatic politics?
Yes, it's 100% lunatic politics. But again, we have, your average American is a good person, I believe, in the heart. No matter what color you are or what anything, I think at the end of the day, the average American's a good person. But I'm going to insult a lot of people right now. They are the most ignorant people on the planet about the world we live in. They don't know anything about the world, literally. I mean, it's embarrassing sometimes, just basic geography questions. Point this on the map, point that on the map. Even if they could, they can't explain anything about the country they're pointing to. I know there's people watching this and on there are going to say, that ain't me. I agree it's not you, but it's a lot of Americans. It's the majority of Americans. And so what politicians have done is to take advantage of this ignorance, to use it for their own domestic political benefit by engendering fear-based politics. Where does fear come from? Ignorance. Because if you're empowered with knowledge and information and you know something about it, when a politician comes and goes, well, I think this, you go, No, boss, that ain't it. See, we got this happening, this happening. The Chinese do this, this, that, the other, and the politician going, damn, oh, excuse my language, darn. You know, we picked the wrong guy to talk to. And then they'll call up the mainstream media and say, why are you allowing them to think? We don't want them to think. We need more blood, more sex, more TNA. We need anything to distract them, get them on the tube so they're not thinking, dumb them down. Oh, and then the mainstream media does it because it's about advertising dollars and money, and that goes into politics, the whole thing. But the whole system that we have today is designed to keep the American people stupid about the world we're in so they can be exploited. Because otherwise, there's no way they could get away with this policy. I mean, it's just straight up stupid. But, you know, it is what it is. Again, the same class of people that are trapped in the post-Cold War ideology with Russia is the same with China. First of all, the first thing you're going to hear from people who don't like China, they're communists. And they're commies. I don't trust the commies. You think they trust you? I mean, if you guys want to pull out the blotter, you know, St. Peter, when you go up there, he's guarding the pearly gates, and he pulls out the thing about all your lies and your bad things. And I think the American chapter is going to be all black with dots because we're very bad boys. The Chinese, they'll have a couple black. They're not that bad. So I think the Chinese are doing better around the world than we are. But we can't tell the truth about that. We can't, because then that means that we have to accept certain realities, like we're not the global hegemon anymore. Listen to what the Biden administration is saying right now. We have to begin a policy designed to seize control of the global supply chains, because we can't compete with China on that. If we compete with China fairly, they're going to beat us. Why? Well, they've just spent the last decade investing $10 trillion into Belts and Roads Initiative, building up infrastructure around the world. I think someone famously said, I may not be happy with the Chinese, but when they come here, they want to build ports. When America comes, they want to bomb villages. So I'll take the port building over bombing villages every day of the week. And that's the fact. So, and what's happened is the Chinese now control the global supply chains. And we saw during the pandemic, when it shut down, we paid a heavy price. So we're trying to safeguard our economy by going out there and building new supply chains. But how are we doing it? There's the problem. You know, if you and I wanted to get into a business relationship, I would imagine I'd take you out to lunch. I'd woo you. I'd buy you gifts for your family, get you on my side, thinking I'm a good guy. And then we sit down and we talk brass tacks about what business we want and how it's going to benefit you and how it's going to benefit me. And there has to be a modicum of honesty on that, because the first time you catch me in a lie, you're walking. It doesn't matter anything. You're not going to deal with a liar. That's called business. That's good business. The Chinese do that. What we do is we come in, you know, if you were another nation, I was America, we come in and say, shut up, sit down. You know, I'm going to buy out the mortgage on your house, and if you do anything wrong, I'm evicting you into the streets. You're going to do it my way or the highway, and all. And are you going to sit there and go, wow, I got a business deal with America. It's wonderful. No, you're going to say, this sucked. I don't want to have anything to do with it. This is what we're doing to the nation. We have to have dollar dominance, because dollar dominance allows us to impose sanctions on you. Marco Rubio gave one of the most honest answers I've ever heard him give to any question ever, when people talked about the decision made by the Brazilian president, Lula, to start using the Chinese yuan in international trade with China, to dump the dollar. He said they can't do that, because if they do that, in a couple of years, we will have no leverage on them. We won't be able to sanction them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's his whole focus. It wasn't about we're losing trade, we're losing market share, we're going to have a drop in GDP. It was, we can't punish them, we can't sanction them. That's the entire American approach right now. And it's wrong, it's failing, and this is why we're losing across the world. We don't treat people with respect at all.
So the last question before you head out, where do you see America at in the next 2 to 3 years, especially if we continue along this pathway of provocations and sanctions and threats?
if we continue on the path that we're currently on, what we're doing is we're allowing the future of our country to be put in the hands of other nations. What I mean by that is we will be creating the potential and indeed the probability of nuclear conflict. And then it's going to be up to the benevolence of the Russians and the Chinese not to take the bait. That's tough to do when you have a nuclear armed United States leaning forward being aggressive. We're in a very dangerous time. And our failed policies are bad. They're failing, but they're backed by a nuclear arsenal, which is all we have left, especially if the dollar collapses and we're looking at a precipitous economic decline. Everything's going to 80s in a handbasket, and the only thing we have are nuclear weapons. So we step in, we start threatening people, pushing our weight around again. And, the smart move on the part of the Russians and Chinese is, what happens when you get an energetic, 80-year-old man starting to punch you. You don't stand there and let him hit in your face. You back off, you absorb the punches, and eventually he's going to get tired and the fight's over. And so the smart thing the Chinese and the Russians can do is just, let America be tough for a little while, but we can't sustain it. Our economy is collapsing. Domestic problems will rise up and eliminate that. But sometimes that's not the case, especially when an 80-year-old guy comes up and pops you in your nose, breaks your nose, it's bleeding, you're hurting. You're going to pop him. You may not want to in retrospect, but natural tendency is, bam, I got you. And then now he's down. We're all dead because now we just went to nuclear war. So we have to change this paradigm, and we have to do it in a couple of ways. One, we the people have to start insisting on better candidates. We can't accept. I mean, what's getting ready to happen in 2024 is just unacceptable. We can't accept a Biden-Trump rematch. We can't. I mean, that if that happens, it just shows us to be literally people who are not deserving of the country we live in. Because America deserves so much better than either one of those people. And we're 320, 330 million strong. There's got to be other people out there. I mean, RFK Jr., give him a shot. There's other people out there. Give them a shot. Listen to them. Anything but these two. And if we can get a dynamic that puts better people into office, then we've shed ourselves, those people trapped in that Cold War ideology, and we have new thinkers now who can sit down and rationally articulate sound policy options and sound diplomacy options, and they're going to be honest to the American people. Again, I think the best thing a politician could ever do is just be honest with the American people. We are a common sense people. We do have good hearts, and we want to do the right thing. But you have to be empowered with knowledge. That's what I always say, knowledge is power. You have to empower yourself with knowledge. And we need elected officials who will no longer use the media as a vehicle of controlling thought, but the media the way it's supposed to be used, to promulgate fact-based truth, to engender debate, discussion, and dialogue on important things, to be a promoter of democratic values. And democratic values can only exist when the people are engaged intellectually, morally, in fact-based discussion. Right now, that's not happening. We need political leaders that will facilitate that, but we have to select the political leaders. Sitting here waiting for a miracle to happen. I mean, and I don't pick on people who are religious, and if that's what you want to do the rest of your life is sit there and pray for something to happen, divine intervention, have at it. I actually believe that God put us on the earth to take matters into our own hands and make the world a better place. And in America, remember, the whole premise of the Constitution, in order to form a more perfect union, that means that it's a work in progress. That means we don't sit here and rest on our laurels. It means we get out there and make it better. And America needs a lot of making better. And so we, the people, have to wake up to do this. And if we don't, I don't see anything good happening.
Now, before you leave, I have some parting words for you because I have to tell the chat just how this guy is. I called him I got in touch with him in the last few minutes of yesterday. He said, I'm busy, I'm strapped, I got to go to Russia in about a day and a half or so, but I'll give you an hour for your chat. And look at him, he's here. He made an hour for you all. You guys need to thank him. Put some clapping emojis in the chat. We might not have the biggest chat, but we have the best and most informed chat out here. Scott, I want to say from the bottom of my heart, I thank you. And man, be blessed and be safe on your trip and on your way when you hit back home. Hit me up so we can do this thing again, my buddy.
Call me. Call me.
Hey, be blessed,
All
man.
right.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you very much. Have a great day.
You too.
Bye.
Now, for everybody, please hit the like button. Please hit the like button. He didn't have to do this, but I wanted to give each and every one of you a treat to give you a show of Scott before he leaves to go to Russia on his book tour. He'll be back. He and I will talk, and he'll be back on the show. He said I think he'll be back around the month of June, and we'll schedule a show for me. He'll be busy. This man is probably he and Larry Johnson are probably two of the most busiest people on YouTube. Thank you so much for joining me on this program. It was going to be short today, and we may come back later on this evening with a vampire stream. Okay, if time permits later this evening, we may do a vampire stream. Join me, hit the like button, subscribe, share the video, tell everybody about it. And as always, we go out the same way we came in, with love and peace in our heart for those of you who want truth and peace. And we love you, but remember that the true and living God will always love you best. And on that note, I got to say it as I always say it. Mama, your baby boy loves you more than life. Everybody, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Deuces.